to me. Dude, he slithered over to me.
And this giant comes out of the cave, and they're all frozen. And he starts running and firing at this giant. Well, the giant moves. He's got a spear in one hand, and he's running really fast. And spears Dan and holds him up like this. Somebody else, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. They basically decapitate him.
Got closer. When he got about 15 yards away from me, I raised that 12 gauge and I blowed his head off.
I feel something pulling at my leg, and I look over, and there are two small gray entities pulling at me. And they're literally, I'm getting pulled off the bed.
I reached my hand into this bush, and I touched air. Couldn't breathe, and I couldn't move, because I know I'm seeing.
If the moon landings are fake, why has Russia or China not exposed the United States for their lies?
Well, that's another one of those things that seems like a relevant question. Like, hey, there were hundreds of thousands of people involved. You couldn't keep a secret from that many people, which is true. So you don't tell them. I mean, duh. If the atomic bomb involved 145,000 people and only 8 knew the truth, and the computer operators in the heart of mission control can't tell the difference between a real flight and a simulation, and there's no independent press coverage, I think they can fake it. So what's going on is these people, they're running the world. And if you refresh my memory, I got a little off track. What was your specific question?
Just as to why other governments that do not like
us. Yeah, that's another argument they make. Why wouldn't Russia tell the truth or China tell the truth? Trust me, China knows the moon landings are fake. In fact, they teach it in their universities that the moon landings are fake, okay? Israel knows that it was fake. They have very good espionage. Russia knows it was fake. Japan probably knows it was fake. The International Space Agency knows that it's fake. But here's the thing. Let's just say I had a picture of a world leader running some country with a prostitute. I could give it to the media for free and ruin that person. Or I could blackmail them over and over and over again. And that's exactly what China, Israel, Japan, Russia, and these other nations that know the truth are doing. It's much more valuable when you have dirt on somebody to keep blackmailing them over and over and over again. That's why they're not going to tell the truth. Not to mention, our CIA knows all about their secrets, which would then come out too. So they just sweep this under the rug. This whole idea that China and Russia are our enemy is simply not true. Trust me. I mean, I turn on, the alleged, mainstream site, and they're saying, Russia is threatening about invading America. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Russia is a huge country. They can barely take care of it. Same thing with China. China has their own problems. They have no interest whatsoever in, spreading themselves thin by invading the United States of America. They are not enemies. The CIA loves China. The CIA is envious of China's, dictatorial government and wish we could have the same, and is trying very hard to have the same over here, and they're getting pretty darn close. At the most, you could call them competitors. But even in the Olympics, let's say they're doing a 1 mile race. Some of your competitors are German, some of your competitors are Russian, and some of your competitors are your fellow Americans. Are they your enemy? No. They're your competitors. And yeah, China is a competitor and Russia is a competitor. But the idea that they're enemies is just a falsehood told by the military-industrial complex to justify all this weaponry that they make, probably like 2,000% off of every purchase.
The idea of blackmail is something that actually makes a lot.
I mean, I'll send you the picture. You can pop it in of these two shadows going from objects that are 5 feet apart from one another, and they're going at 90 degrees. And you can put, Tony, beside that picture, natural sunlight, which shows that they're always parallel. Now, if you put these two pictures side by side, you see that one was taken with sunlight, and the other obviously was taken with electrical light, which they claim was on the moon, which means the moon landings are fake. I mean, you only need this one picture to prove that the moon landings are fake. That's all the proof that you need. I saw that. I saw the strange behavior of the first crew to the moon, two of the three of which would rarely talk about it. I saw that the administrator of NASA resigned. I saw that the Soviets had a 5-to-1 advantage in the amount of hours in space than the U.S. did at the time. They launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first crew of 3, the first of the spacewalk, the first of 2 spacecrafts at the same time. They were so much more advanced, and yet they never went to the moon, and somehow we did. You know, with only an 8-year goal. An 8-year goal in the 1960s, and yet with 5 decades better technology, they say it's going to take 15 years, you know, to go to the moon. And they've set the goal to return to the moon 10 times, and 10 times they haven't been able to keep that schedule. They can't even orbit a probe unmanned around the moon on schedule. They said in 2016 they were going to do that in 2018, and it never happened. So I saw all these things that seemed to indicate it was a sobering possibility that indeed the missions were fake. And I knew I loved puzzles. I knew I have kind of this relentless personality. And so I thought, you know, if I start investigating this, it could be dangerous. So I actually turned down the project. I said, hey, look, you know, I'd like to have a wife and family someday. Why should I risk my life for what President Johnson or Nixon did? Then I had a client who was a Christian musician, and they said they'd get a screenplay of mine as a filmmaker to this famous producer if I did a favor for them, and that was simply to read the Bible. And I remember I started reading the Bible June 3rd, 1989, when the guy in China with the grocery bag stood in front of a tank to protect his countrymen. And I read what was called the 1-year Bible, which is divided into 365 daily readings, and I read that thing 5 times from cover to cover. Now, I wasn't a Christian, but I did come to the conclusion that there is a creator. I mean, the departmentalization of the body shows that, you know, it didn't make itself. I mean, evolution actually says that a lower form of life made a higher form of life, which is the opposite of logic. So there is a creator, and, you know, it's logical, really, that there's a judgment for how you live your life. You know, if you consistently are evil and don't repent, I bet the outcome in the next life is going to be different than people, as flawed as they might be, trying to pursue being honorable against their bad habits that they grew up in. So I began to see, you know, there is a God, you know, there is a judgment to come. I'm going to die anyway. And if they didn't go to the moon, that would actually be more profound of an event historically than if they'd actually gone. I mean, think about it. Let's say they could go to the moon, could plant the flag on this rock, or the alternative, which is they couldn't go, lied about it, murdered people, falsified documents. That's actually more profound than if they had actually gone. So I said, if they didn't go, this is a highly significant historical event that is being basically withheld from the public. And for their common good, we need to know that our government or world leaders are this corrupt if it's true. So I changed my mind after 5 years. I started making the film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which took 7 years to make. And with Astronauts Gone Wild, we spent about $1 million. And our chief investor is a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA.
Wow.
Okay? So the guy knows from an engineering point of view, they couldn't go to the moon. They can't go to the moon today. So how could they possibly go on the first attempt with 1960s technology with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone? So he financed all of this. And as you know from the book Moon Man, I go into, for the first time, the kind of behind-the-scenes espionage type of adventures that I had to endure, discovering footage of them faking part of the photography right in front of your eyes. And then I was put in touch with a gentleman who was actually there. He was the chief of security at the military base here in the United States where the moon landing was actually filmed. I won't tell you what that is. You'll have to read the book to find out. But he was an MP, chief of security of this particular military base. He stood beside President Johnson while Apollo 11 was filmed in June of 1968, a year in advance. And that's why Johnson didn't run for re-election when he was eligible, because he knew the moon landing was going to be faked a year later. And who knew if that would work or not? You might get caught. How would you like to be president and get caught faking the moon landing, right? So he didn't want to have anything to do with that. We also have the code name of the project, the military base where it was filmed, the dates it was filmed, and a list of 15 people who were there at the time, some of which are still alive to this day. All given to me by the man who was there on his deathbed, confessed that he was there at the time because he wanted to get it off his chest. And when he saw it a year later on TV, he wept and said, well, I guess they had a really good reason for doing that. I mean, yeah, they have a really good reason for embezzling $200 billion, murdering people to keep it a secret. And then, it gets even worse because a lot of people ask, and I did an interview recently where the person asked a really good question. They said, well, what difference does it make? Yeah, they counterfeited a painting, they counterfeited $100 bill, they counterfeited a moon landing. And, in and of itself, that's a great point. I mean, who cares what difference does it make? But here's why it matters. The Apollo 1 crew was going to be the first crew to walk on the moon. And on January 27th, 1967, they died in a mysterious fire. Now, it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of the dead man's widow, who I talked with for about 3 hours. It's the opinion of the dead man's son, who I talked with for about 3 hours, who is a 747 pilot. I think he knows what he's talking about. And they are 100% convinced that the fire that killed the crew that would have been the first men on the moon, that fire was set intentionally and set by the CIA, because the dead man told his wife the day before that for the first time in the entire Apollo program, the CIA was all over the launch pad the day before, and the very next day the guy died, and they are convinced that some sort of device was put there by the CIA which burned these men alive, because the commander had a well-established reputation for anti-corruption. And they knew that had they asked him to participate in the fraud, he probably would go to the media and tell the truth about what's going on, because he had done such a thing before. So, yeah, they faked the moon landing, so what if it didn't kill anybody? But the fact is, they murdered their own people to keep it a secret. Now, the founding document of our country is the Declaration of Independence. It precedes the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You could say it's the foundational document for this alleged democracy that we have, which obviously we don't have anymore, when Congress and the Senate certainly didn't vote to fake the moon landings and murder their own astronauts to keep it a secret. So whoever's running the country is not Congress and the Senate, which means we don't have a democracy at all anymore. That's what this means. Now, they fight feverishly so that the truth about the moon landing will not come out. Not just because they counterfeited it, because they murdered the crew of Apollo 1 in order to keep it a secret. Again, this is not my opinion. It's the opinion of the dead man's son and the dead man's widow. So the foundational document says that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the government took away his life to cover up their own crimes. And then it goes on to say, when any government becomes destructive of these ends of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness of the citizens, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And I think we are clearly at that hour. We have been at that hour for the last 55 years since the CIA killed their own president. And that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the dead man's nephew, who has done thousands of hours of investigation into this. That's our country. And so Moon Man, the book, isn't just about, the moon landing being faked, which it was. A third of it's about that. A third of it is about these never before told, encounters that I had with the CIA, including being kidnapped, including being abducted, including being given true serum. I even peed in a cup and had a friend take it to a lab in his name and not mine to prove that I had been drugged by this exotic CIA drug. And then my friend calls me back and says, there was a problem. I'm like, oh, what was the problem? He says, well, the lab told him that over the weekend when they had my specimen there, that there was a break-in. And I'm like, yeah. And they said, well, the only thing taken out of the whole lab was my urine sample, which proves I was drugged with true serum. And then finally, the other third is simply, a cry out, a rallying cry, because These people did fake the moon landing. They did kill Kennedy. They did do 9/11. They did the Gulf of Tonkin, and they're currently doing this little episode that's going on now. And this is a very alarming state. These people are murderers. They murdered their own people. Whoever did 9/11, and trust me, it wasn't 9 guys from Saudi Arabia. They murdered 3,000 people without thinking about it. And there's a vice president of a certain pharmaceutical company, right, who says these people are mass murderers. And once you cross that line and decide you're willing to kill 3 people, right, in the Apollo 1 crew, what is it to add, 3 zeros to that and kill 3,000 people on 9/11? And what is it to add maybe 3 or 4 more zeros to that and kill millions of people with this current thing that's going on, pushing medicine on people for an illness that they don't even have?